Good morning, students. Today we are going to discuss about the cost functions, and there is a inverse relationship between the production function and cost function, you know very well, because your AC say the nature of average cost curve and the nature of MC or marginal cost curve is U-shaped. But if we can decide about your average product or marginal product, AP or MP, then it is inverted U-shape, right? So in logical also, as production increases, the cost per head declines. So obviously if SCMC takes the U-shape curve, then automatically marginal productivity and average productivity takes the shape of inverted U-shape. Next, we are going to discuss about some extra points, some important points which are relevant in case of MA entrance. So note down about these cost analysis, right? And it is very familiar to you from the +2 syllabus, right? So come to what is cost. The cost refers to the expenditure incurred by the producer. That may be your explicit cost or that may be your implicit cost. For the production purpose, it is for the production purpose for the given amount of output of a commodity, right? So if we can divide the inputs into two broad concepts, the inputs can be divided into two parts. One is primary input and another is secondary input. Primary input is that input which is directly connected to the production process. Similarly, the secondary input are those input which are connected to production process indirectly. Suppose there is a demand for fertilizer, there is a demand for seeds for the agriculture. That is a example of secondary inputs, right? Then you are familiar with your implicit cost and explicit cost. Explicit cost are those costs which are incurred by the producer for the payments of the endowment of several kinds of factor owners. But in case of implicit cost, it uses or it refers to the cost using the cost using self-owned inputs. If one owner is there and he uses his land for the production purpose and he is a laborer and he invests some amount of capital, so interest to his capital, rent for his land are the example of implicit cost. So it is the amount of some pain and sufferings included in case of implicit cost. But when we can go for the opportunity cost, it is the next best alternative which is to be forgone. So you may note down that opportunity cost is that cost which is incurred by the producer for the next best alternative which is forgone, right? Next come to your production cost and selling cost. In case of production cost, that is expenditure by the producer on input for the producing of a given level of output. In another side, if the cost is a selling cost, then the expenditure by the producer to promote the sale of the commodity. Suppose there is a advertisement and there is a salary paid to the your so many medical representatives if medicine is produced. These are the costs used, these are the costs accumulated in the case of selling cost. But in case of production cost, it is the net payment for the reward of the input owners, right? Next we can go for, these are the opportunity cost we have discussed in earlier, and opportunity cost may be both explicit and implicit cost. It includes both explicit and implicit cost. It is a very important point for a MA entrance. It can ask that explicit cost and implicit cost is equal to opportunity cost. That is right. That is a right statement, right? Next, come to the sunk cost. It is a new concept for you. The sunk cost is that expenditure by the producer that cannot be recovered. And the general example of the sunk cost, if a bridge is constructed in a area, then the total amount of bridge on a river cannot be compensated by its future, so it cannot be recovered in another way. So the total amount of cost that cannot be recovered is called as sunk cost. That is a permanently lost, that is a permanently spent, that is a permanently lost. If there is a bridge over your any kind of river, that cost cannot be recovered, or that cost cannot be earned by the government. So that is the example of sunk cost, right? And sunk cost is also called as embedded cost, or prior year cost, or standard cost, and sunk capital. These are the so many important notes you have to note down, please. So then we can go for the theory of cost. If we can divide the theory of cost into two parts, it is short term cost and long term cost. In case of short term cost, all factors are, there may be some variable factor or there may be some fixed factor, but in case of long run, all costs are variable, all costs are variable, right? So there is no such discriminating definitions between the short run and long run, though it is bounded to 5 year, 10 year, it is not. In case of when all factors are variable, then that period is called as long run. So it may be 10 year, it may be 20 year, it may be 30 years. Next, short run cost function. In short run, output is increased by the variable factors such as labor, raw material, fuels, while the quantity of fixed factors such as capital, plants and building remain constant. So that is, a part is divided into fixed cost and another part is divided into variable cost. So the total cost can be sum of the total fixed cost plus total variable cost, right? Then total fixed cost. Total fixed cost is the fixed amount, whatever may be the change in output, whatever may be the change in output. So here the fixed cost is otherwise known as overhead cost, supplementary cost and indirect cost. So these are very important point you have to note down. So that note is very important, right? That cost actually you have read from the plus 2, but some new concepts are added in that class which has to be remembered for you. So the shape of the total fixed cost is horizontal to x-axis, right? Next come to the total variable cost. So these cost increases as the amount of output also increases and also declines, vice versa. When the output is 0, then the variable cost is also 0. So it is started from the 0. It is started from the 0. So the variable cost is otherwise known as direct cost or prime cost, and your fixed cost is otherwise known as indirect cost, and variable cost is known as your direct cost or prime cost, right? So it can take the shape of a quadratic function, that is like a quadratic function. So the TVC or TC curve is a quadratic function, Next come to the behavior of variable cost and total fixed cost. If we can say the total cost and TVC, and the difference between TC curve and TVC curve is your TFC. So as you know that TFC plus TVC is equal to total cost, right? So there is a what is the nature of TC and TVC? There is a parallel distance in between the TC and TVC due to the constant nature of the total fixed cost, right? Next, average cost, that is your TC by Q, it is per head output cost, that is called as per head output cost. So if you can remember, the shape of AC curve is U shape and the shape of MC curve is also U shape, and AFC curve is rectangular hyperbola. The shape of AFC curve is rectangular hyperbola. Next come to the average fixed cost. Average fixed cost is equal to TFC by Q, total fixed cost, the fixed cost per unit of output. So it takes the rectangular hyperbola. So that is also important point. The shape of average fixed cost is rectangular hyperbola, right? Next come to the average variable cost. The average variable cost is the variable cost per unit of output, so it is TVC divided by Q. TVC divided by Q. And your AC is the summation of AFC plus ABC, though the TC is sum of TVC plus TC. So you can take, and you must have read why AC is U-shape, because it takes the falling part of AC and it takes AFC and the rising part of ABC. So it can take the U-shape. The downward sloping part of AC is derived from the downward sloping part of AFC, and the upward sloping part of average cost is derived from the upward sloping part of ABC. Then come to the marginal cost. The marginal cost is the addition to total cost due to the additional 1 unit of output. So the change in total cost due to the change in quantity. So MCN is equal to TCN minus TCN minus 1, and the nature of marginal cost curve is also U-shape curve, right. Next, the relation between AC and MC, that is very important, and also that is a part of your mathematical economics. When AC falls, MC is less than AC. When AC rises, MC is greater than AC. When AC is constant, MC is equal to AC, right. That is according to the slope, that is according to the slope of the curve. Then come to the theory of long run. The theory of long run is defined as a period of time in which all factors of production are variable. So it is not confined to 10 years, it is not confined to 3 years, or it is not confined to 5 years. So what is the time period taken by a producer to change its all sorts of inputs as a variable, right. So in the long run, output can be increased by the variable factors such as labor, raw materials, as well as the fixed factor capital, plant and size. So all these factors are variable. The long run represents a planning horizon. So the long run is otherwise known as the planning. So long run average cost curve, so it is otherwise known as the planning curve. Before an investment is made, the firm has a long run situation, because it has to plan in a proper way in order to motivate its profits, or in order to induce more amount of profits, right. Next, in case of long run average cost curve, it is a long run total cost divided by the level of output. Your LSC is equal to LTC divided by Q, and LSC is least possible average cost for producing the various level of output. Then LSC is made with the various short run cost curve, so it is otherwise known as envelope curve, because here if you see the diagram, the downward part of SSC is tangent to the downward part of LSC. In case of SSC2, the F point, there is a tangency point, and it is tangency between the downward part of LSC and the downward part of SSC2. If we can go for SSC4, then we can see at the point P, the lowest point of SSC is tangent to the lowest point of LSC, right. Next, if we can go for rightward movement, then there will be the upward sloping part of SSC is tangent to the upward sloping part of LSC in case of T. So it take a shape of saucer shape. It is not steeper. If we can discriminate between the shape of SSC and LSC, SSC is your U-shaped but steeper, but in case of LSC it is more flatter. So it can take the shape of saucer shape. So it is otherwise known as the plant curve, because there is a several kinds of long run period which is availed by the producer to plan. So it is called as planning curve or plant curve, right. Next, It is also known as the planning curve, because the farm takes plan to choose the plants in which the investment to be made, because it has a long run period in his hand to invest, right. Next, come to the long run average cost curve. In case of constant cost case, the linear homogeneous production function implies the constant returns to scale, and in case of constant returns to scale, increasing returns to scale and decreasing returns to scale. In case of constant returns to scale, the increase of output is equal to the increase of input, which means that when all inputs are increased in a certain proportion, output increases in the same proportion. So when the returns to scale are constant, then cost per unit of output remain same. So the LAC is your horizontal to x-axis, right. And which is a amalgamation of several kinds of SAC. Next, LAC is horizontal if the two plants are perfectly divisible. In case of LAC will be horizontal straight line showing the LAC constant returns to scale, right. So these are the several points. What is the main cause? Due to the invisibility of factor. Due to the invisibility of factor, due to the absence of internal economies, your LAC may be horizontal to x-axis, right. Next, the minimum efficient scale. The minimum efficient scales of the plant is the level of output at which LAC is minimum. So we can see the optimum size of a plant. Where the optimum size of a plant is attained? Remember, the optimum size of a farm is attained at which the least point of SAC is tangent to the least point of LAC at P. Here see the diagram. At P, the least point of SAC is tangent to the least point of LAC. So it is called as optimum output size or optimum size of a farm. In various time it is asked in the PG questions, so it is very important, keep in mind that. Then if we go for the modern development in the cost theory, it is a saucer shaped curve. According to the modern economist, SABC is saucer type, a shape rather than U shape, because you know that the SAC is steeper and U shaped, but in case of LAC it is flatter and U shaped. The flat stretch of SAC is called reserve capacity. And in the before slide you can conclude about your optimum. Here is your optimum size of farm. Here you can another new concept, that is a reserve capacity. Where the SAC curve or your LAC curve takes the horizontal shape. If look into the diagram, if we can say Q1 to Q2, there is a horizontal shape which is called as the reserve capacity. The flatness of SAC is called as a reserve capacity which is built in the plant size in view of impact flexibility in production, so that the farm can expand its output over the certain range without rise greater demand in a unit cost to meet any amount of output in future, right. So if the reverse capacity is that capacity, so we can define the reverse capacity is a that capacity in which the plant can expand its output over a long run period with a constant amount, that is defined in the diagram as the Q1 to Q2. Next, the short run average total cost curve. If we can see, the short run average total cost declines up to the level of output at which the reserve capacity is fully exhausted. It is fully exhausted. In before diagram we can say in case of QM, in case of at the point of QM, we can say beyond that level of output will be rise with the further increase in the output. So at the least point of QM there is a least point of LSC, or there is a least point of SSC. So it uses its full capacity of its full reserve capacity. Next, according to the modern theory, we can conclude that the LSC curve is L-shaped. The LSC curve is L-shaped, and L-shaped LSC curve implies that in the beginning, when output is expanded, though the increase in plant size and associated with variable cost, the cost per unit falls rapidly due to the economies of scale. Due to the only one reason, economies of scale, as the output increases, the per head unit of cost declines. So that is the main reason behind that L-shaped LSC curve rather than U-shape, according to the modern economist, not the traditional. These are the very important points. Next, come to the learning by doing curves, and the learning by doing curves is otherwise known as also the LSC curve. The learning curve shows the cumulative experience by the firm in the production of output over the time increases efficiency in use of inputs such as labor and raw materials, because in case of long run, a plant curve or a planning curve, it is termed as, because it has a long time to plan or long time to decide in what firm it has to invest more amount of investment in order to generate profit. So it has a greater amount of experience, and what type of experience? It is by the learning by doing. As a result, there is a lower cost per unit of output, right? So this much. Thank you very much for listening with patience, and keep in mind that you have to note down all its point that may be new to all, and actually the cost is in your syllabus from the +2 level. So you have to remember very extra points which are mentioned by me in that note. Thank you very much and have a nice day.